That night, the chandelier above our dining room table threw diamonds across the silverware, glittering like a stage light waiting for the performance to begin. My brother Ethan had chosen Christmas Eve for his grand announcement because, as he said with a grin, nothing says success like closing a $1 billion deal under mistletoe. His words made the guests laugh, but my stomach tightened. They had no idea that this dinner, his masterpiece of arrogance, would become his undoing. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, my cream silk blouse a deliberate contrast to the sparkling gowns around me. To them, I was just Clara, the quiet, slightly awkward younger sister, who'd spent too many years away. The one they said never quite understood business. The kind who should smile politely and stay invisible. Ethan's voice carried across the long table, smooth and rehearsed. "This merger will make Hayes Capital unstoppable," he said, raising his glass. "To family legacy and power that outlives us all." The room erupted in applause. But I didn't raise my glass. I just smiled, the kind of small, careful smile you give before striking the match. The dining room at the Hayes estate was a theater of wealth. Gold-edged plates, crystal glasses, and a fireplace that roared, even though the thermostat was already too high. Margaret, my stepmother, sat near Ethan, wrapped in a crimson gown that matched the wine in her glass. She'd always liked to sit beside him, basking in the reflection of his success. She caught me looking and smiled, a polished, brittle thing. "Clara, darling," she said sweetly, "you look so simple tonight." I let out a soft breath, pretending not to hear the condescension. "It's Christmas," I said. "I thought I'd keep it simple." Her smile sharpened. "Of course you did." Around her, a few guests chuckled, polite, poisonous laughter. I could feel it ripple down the table like static. Ethan didn't defend me. He never did. He was too busy impressing the Artemis global executives seated to his right. "Ignore her," he whispered to them, loud enough for me to hear. "She's just the quiet type." Quiet type. That's what they called it when you didn't fit their narrative. Across from me, Victor Lang, a venture capitalist known for both his charm and his ruthlessness, leaned back in his chair. His dark eyes flicked between Ethan and me, as though he was watching a play he already knew the ending to. "I heard Artemis Global's board finally approved the acquisition," he said, his voice casual. "That's a big step, Ethan." Ethan grinned, tapping his champagne flute. "Final paperwork goes through tonight. Once it's signed, Hayes Capital becomes the biggest privately held fund in New England." Margaret clapped softly, looking like she'd just been crowned queen. And to think she said this all began when Ethan was barely 30. "You've made your father proud." I tilted my head slightly. "Has he—" The table went quiet for a second too long. Then Ethan laughed, forced and sharp. "Don't start, Clara. Not tonight." "I wasn't starting," I said softly. "Just wondering if pride and approval are the same thing." He ignored me, raising his glass again. "To progress." The toast was followed by a wave of conversation, money stocks, vacation homes, and the language of people who believed they'd built their own thrones. I let the noise wash over me, pretending to study the pattern on the tablecloth. My phone buzzed once in my lap. A message appeared from Dalton, our company's former CFO, now working quietly under a different title at my firm. "Dalton, everything's ready. All it takes is your confirmation." My heart didn't race. It didn't even flutter. Just a single steady beat, as if my body already knew this was inevitable. I looked up at Ethan, his smile wide, his hand gesturing animatedly as he described strategic acquisitions and tax efficiencies. It was the same hand that once shoved me out of Father's office the day after the funeral. "You're not built for this, Clara," he'd said. "You feel too much. Business doesn't have room for feelings." He was right about one thing: feelings have no place in business. But justice fits beautifully. Margaret turned to one of the guests, lowering her voice just enough to be overheard. "We're so fortunate, truly. Ethan inherited his father's brilliance. Clara, bless her, got his heart." There was laughter again, low, smug. I met her eyes. "He also left me something else," I said. She frowned. "Oh," I smiled faintly. "His patience." It wasn't a lie. I'd waited 5 years for this moment. Dinner continued: lobster bisque, seared duck, a display of excess that smelled faintly of desperation. The servants moved silently, refilling glasses, clearing plates, pretending not to hear the laughter. Every once in a while, I caught one of them looking at me with quiet curiosity, like they could sense the shift in the air. As dessert was served, something chocolate and gold and ridiculous, Ethan stood raising his glass once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we sign the merger documents, I'd like to dedicate this evening to my family. To those who've stood by me through every challenge, every success, every decision." He paused, his eyes finding me at the end of the table. "And even to those who drifted away." The words landed like a slap disguised as kindness. The guests murmured approvingly. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "Touching," I said. "Almost sounds like forgiveness." He smirked. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. It's Christmas." "Yes," I said softly. "It is." He turned to Victor. "Let's finalize the deal, shall we?" A tablet was passed around for digital signatures. Ethan signed first, his name large and confident on the screen. Margaret signed next, her diamond bracelet catching the light. One by one, the partners followed. Finally, the tablet reached me. Ethan looked amused. "You don't have to sign anything, Clara. This is big league business." I glanced up. "Oh, I know." I took the tablet anyway. My name, Clara M. Hayes, was already listed under founder authorization. Ethan's smile faltered. Wait, what's your name doing there?" I met his eyes calm as the snow began to fall outside. "Father's final amendment. You didn't read it, did you?" He blinked. "You're joking." I pressed my thumb to the screen. The tablet chimed softly, authorization accepted. A notification flashed instantly on his phone, then on Margaret's, then on Victor's. Every conversation in the room stopped. Ethan picked up his phone, his brow furrowing. "What the hell?" I sipped my champagne. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." His voice rose. "You can't just— What did you do?" "Nothing," I said. Standing. "Just ensured that Hayes Capital's final deal meets ethical compliance, which unfortunately your merger doesn't." He stared at me, color draining from his face. "You don't have that kind of authority." "I do now," I said, my voice calm. "You see, the board reinstated Father's original succession plan. Effective midnight tonight." Margaret gasped. Victor looked stunned but not surprised. "You planned this?" Ethan hissed. I looked down the table, the light from the chandelier catching the edge of my glass. "No," I said quietly. "You did the moment you underestimated me." Silence stretched across the room, thick and brittle. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the driveway in a soft white hush. The kind of hush that comes right before the sound of something breaking. I walked toward the door, my heels echoing against the marble. "Enjoy dessert," I said over my shoulder. "You'll need the sweetness. The bank will call in the morning." And then I left. Behind me, the murmur of panic began, chairs scraping, phones lighting up, voices trembling. But I didn't turn back, because this time, I didn't need to watch it burn to know that it finally would. Snow fell through the night like ashes after a fire. By morning, the city was wrapped in a silence that followed an explosion you couldn't see but could still feel. I woke to a dozen missed calls and an inbox flooded with unread messages. Ethan's name appeared at least 20 times. I didn't open a single one. Some storms didn't need a witness. My coffee steamed against the frosted kitchen window of my downtown apartment. The view stretched across Boston Harbor, gray water, frozen light, a skyline built by men who thought permanence was a guarantee. My phone buzzed again, and this time I answered. "Good morning, Clara Dalton," said his voice, calm, the kind of calm that came after long nights and expensive victories. "You've made headlines." "Already?" I asked. "Oh, you're trending before sunrise. Hayes Capital's stock halted trading pre-market. Their merger with Artemis Global is officially under investigation. The SEC called at 6. I stirred my coffee once, slow and steady. "I assume Ethan's losing his mind." "You assume correctly," he said. "He's blaming a cyber incident. Margaret's claiming sabotage. The board is panicking. You'd almost feel sorry for them." "Almost," I said. Dalton hesitated, then added, "The reinstatement documents went through perfectly. You're legally recognized as the primary owner and executor of the Hayes Trust. No loopholes. I leaned back against the counter. Then it's done. For now, he replied. But you know him, Clara. Ethan doesn't give up without a fight. Expect lawyers' tears and maybe a few family threats. Let him come, I said. I've already fought harder battles than his ego. Dalton chuckled. Remind me never to cross you. You already did once, I said softly. You just chose the right side before it was too late. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. By midday, the city had thawed enough for the world to return to its rhythm of traffic and noise. Mine didn't. I walked through downtown to the old Hayes building, our father's headquarters, its glass walls glinting in the winter sun. It had been years since I'd stepped inside. The revolving doors opened with a hiss, and the lobby greeted me like an old photograph, familiar but faded. The receptionist looked up, startled. Miss Hayes? I nodded. Is my brother in? Her eyes darted nervously toward the elevator. He's in his office, but he's not taking visitors. I smiled faintly. I think he'll take this one. As the elevator climbed, I watched my reflection in the steel doors. A calm face, steady eyes, nothing of the trembling girl who once stood outside those same doors holding a cardboard box after being told she didn't belong. When the doors opened, I stepped into the top floor. Ethan's voice was already raised before I even reached his office. Fix it, he barked. I don't care how, just reverse the transaction. She doesn't have the authority to... He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. The phone fell silent in his hand. Speak of the devil, he muttered. Careful, I said, closing the door behind me. You wouldn't want to offend your new majority shareholder. His face darkened. You think this is funny? You embarrassed me in front of investors, humiliated our entire family, and now you walk in here like some savior. I didn't humiliate anyone, I said evenly. I corrected a mistake. You destroyed everything Father built. No, Ethan, I said, stepping closer. You did when you turned his company into your personal casino. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero because you pushed a few legal documents. You don't understand the scale of what you've done. I understand it perfectly, I said. You wanted power without consequence. I simply reminded the world what consequence looks like. He slammed his hand on the desk. You always had that self-righteous tone, like you were better than everyone else. You think being quiet makes you wise? It just makes you forget. I met his gaze unflinching. Then why can't you forget me? The silence that followed was colder than the snow outside. Margaret entered a few minutes later, wrapped in fur and fury. Clara, how could you? She demanded. After all we've done for you. For me, I asked. You mean after all you've done to me? There's a difference. She glared at me, voice trembling. I welcomed you into this family. I laughed quietly. You mean you tolerated me long enough to secure your son's inheritance? Her eyes flashed. You were nobody before Ethan took over. Don't rewrite history. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. I'm not rewriting anything, Margaret. I'm restoring it. Father's will was clear. I was supposed to oversee Hayes Capital. You manipulated the lawyer and silenced his final directive. You lied, forged, and bullied your way into power. And for what? A title? A house full of gold and ghosts. She raised her chin. You think this makes you righteous? You'll end up alone, Clara. Power is cold comfort. Then it's a temperature I've learned to survive, I said. Ethan turned away, pacing. You want the company? Fine. Take it. But don't think for a second this makes you a better leader. The board won't follow you. You've been gone too long. You're nothing but a ghost with a title. Then let's see how much noise a ghost can make, I said quietly. Later, as I left the building, the winter wind caught my hair and carried the faint echo of Christmas carols from the street below. The city felt different now, alive in a way it hadn't when I was buried under their shadows. People rushed past their faces, pink from the cold, their laughter rising like smoke. Dalton called again. News networks are confirming your reinstatement, he said. They're calling it a corporate reckoning. Catchy, I said. There's more. Victor Lang wants to meet. Says he has a proposal. Victor Lang doesn't propose, I said. He tests. And I have a feeling he just might be the one man in this city who isn't trying to sell me something. Dalton laughed softly. Still, you should hear him out. He's not the enemy. Maybe not, I said. But in this city, no one stays a friend for long. That night I sat in my apartment, lights dim, laptop open. A flood of notifications danced across the screen, news headlines, shareholder emails, reporters hungry for comment. Hayes Capital scandal rocks financial sector. The silent daughter returns. Who is Clara M. Hayes? I closed the laptop and looked out the window. Across the harbor, the skyline shimmered in the dark, each window a small universe of ambition and deceit. Somewhere out there, Margaret was drinking herself numb, and Ethan was plotting his next move. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. It felt inevitable. A knock came at the door. When I opened it, Victor Lang stood there, snow-dusting his coat. You're hard to reach these days, he said. I've been busy reclaiming what's mine. He smiled faintly. So I've heard. May I? I stepped aside. He walked in, glancing around my apartment, the absence of luxury, the simplicity. You could live in a penthouse overlooking the river, he said. I prefer a place where I can hear myself think. He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. I didn't come here to gloat, Clara. I came to ask what you're going to do next. The city's watching. Investors are circling. The board's terrified. You've got leverage, real power. But power demands purpose. I looked at him. The purpose is easy. Truth is harder. He studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, Be careful. Justice and revenge. They look the same until the bill comes due. I walked him to the door. Then I hope I can afford it. When he was gone, I stood there for a long time, staring at the snow melting against the glass. The city hummed below, alive with stories of downfall and rebirth. Somewhere between them, my name had found its place again. And for the first time since my father's death, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. I felt like the author. By Monday morning, the city had teeth again. The snow was melting into dirty slush, and the air carried the sharp tang of business, as usual, the kind of morning where fortunes were made and others quietly buried. I arrived at the Hayes Capital Tower just after 7, walking through the revolving doors that once spit me out with nothing but a cardboard box and a broken name. This time the guards greeted me with, Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Not miss, not ma'am, but Ms., the title of someone they didn't dare underestimate anymore. I rode the elevator alone. The mirrored walls reflected a woman I barely recognized, calm, deliberate, untouchable. The last time I'd stood there, I was shaking 28, the ink from my dad's funeral still fresh on my hands. Ethan had told me I didn't have what it took to lead. Now the building carried my name again, and he couldn't change that, not with lawyers, not with charm, not with threats. When the elevator door slid open, the floor was eerily quiet. My dad's old portrait still hung outside the boardroom, his expression patient, knowing, as if he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I paused in front of it. You were right, I murmured. They were built on sand. Inside the boardroom was a war zone disguised as civility. 12 directors sat around the glass table, faces drawn, eyes darting. At the head sat Ethan, pale but composed, a performance of authority. Margaret wasn't there. She never came when there was blood on the floor. As I entered, chairs shifted. Conversations died. Every gaze landed on me like a weapon half drawn. Clara, Ethan said, his voice clipped. We weren't expecting you. Then you haven't learned much, I replied. I took the empty seat across from him, the one that used to belong to our dad. He smiled tightly. We're in the middle of crisis control. There's a lot at stake. And you're the one who caused it. I finished for him. Let's not waste anyone's time pretending otherwise. A murmur rippled down the table. One of the directors, an older man named Harlan, cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, regardless of personal disagreements, this merger failure affects everyone in this room. We need to move forward. I met his eyes. Forward, yes, but not in the same direction. Ethan leaned back, his voice oily. You think you can just waltz in here and rewrite corporate strategy because of a clause Dad added to his will? You don't understand the scale of this business, Clara. You never did. I folded my hands on the table. You're right. I didn't understand why you thought power meant entitlement. But I do now. Victor Lang, seated near the end, watched me closely. Expression unreadable. He'd invested in Hayes Capital before the fall, but unlike the others, he didn't look nervous. He looked curious. I came to propose a new direction, I said. Hayes Capital will liquidate certain divisions, repay creditors, and re-establish our integrity before any new ventures begin. Ethan laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. Integrity. That's your big idea. You'll tank what's left of the company for some moral grandstanding. I looked at him. The market already did that for you. The silence that followed was almost a physical thing, thick, suffocating. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Harlan spoke first. Ms. Hayes, with respect, that kind of restructuring takes time and capital we don't have. Then I'll bring it, I said. Hayes, Trust has access to dormant assets. Dad diversified decades ago. They were never under corporate control. They're mine to release. Ethan's jaw tightened. You wouldn't. I met his glare. I already did. He slammed his hand on the table. You're going to destroy everything. No, I said quietly. I'm going to rebuild it the way it was meant to be. Victor's voice cut through the tension, smooth and calm. I've seen worse recoveries. She's right about one thing: trust takes longer to earn than profit. The markets will forgive failure before corruption. A few heads nodded hesitantly. The tide was shifting. Ethan saw it too. He pointed at me. She's not qualified. She hasn't been part of this company for years. She doesn't understand the landscape. Neither did you, I said. You just thought it was yours to own. His face flushed crimson. You think Dad wanted you to run his empire? You were always too soft. I rose slowly, my voice low but steady. Soft doesn't mean weak, Ethan. It means I remember what matters. He built this family empire to serve people, not enslave them. You turned it into a monument to yourself. The room fell silent again. Only the hum of the city below broke through. After the meeting, I walked with Victor down the corridor. He stayed a step behind, studying me. You handled that well, he said. They're terrified, I replied. Fear makes men reasonable, at least for a while. He smiled faintly. You really are your dad's daughter. I stopped at the window overlooking the city. No, I said. I'm his unfinished business. For years I'd waited for justice. I didn't realize until now I was becoming it. By late afternoon, the board had agreed to a temporary freeze on all trading activity under the Hayes name until the internal audit was complete. It wasn't victory, but it was control, and control was everything. As I left, reporters were waiting outside, their voices cutting through the cold air. Ms. Hayes, is it true you've taken over Hayes Capital? Did you sabotage your brother's merger? What's your next move? I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Cameras flashed against the pale sky, capturing an image they'd spin into whatever narrative sold best. I got into the waiting car and told the driver, the Hayes estate. He hesitated. The family home, ma'am? Yes, I said. It's time. The drive took less than an hour, but it felt longer. The closer we got, the more the past pressed down on me. Every mile of snow-covered road carried echoes of laughter, arguments, and silence, the kind that fills hallways after love has left. When the mansion came into view, its stone walls glowed faintly gold under the setting sun. It was beautiful in the way old things are beautiful, because they remember everything. Margaret opened the door before I could knock. She looked smaller, thinner. Her usual poise cracked around the edges. Clara, she said softly, what are you doing here? Closure, I said. She stepped aside. The grand hall smelled of cedar and perfume, and Dad's portrait above the fireplace looked dull with dust. I don't want to fight, she said. Good, I replied. Neither do I. We stood there in silence, two women bound by a man who had loved one of us more purely than the other. He would be ashamed of you, she whispered. No, I said. He'd be ashamed of what you became. Her eyes glistened, but her chin didn't waver. You'll understand one day. Power doesn't keep you warm at night. Neither does guilt, I said. When I left, the snow had started falling again, soft and relentless. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from the valley below. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time, the place that had buried my innocence and tonight returned my power. My reflection in the window looked calm, almost peaceful. Dalton's words from the day before came back to me. He won't stop, Clara. He'll come for you. Let him, I thought, because I'd already stopped running. And for the first time in my life, the fear that used to follow me home was finally gone. By morning, the country already had its newest obsession, the quiet heiress who toppled her brother. Headlines buzzed through every newsfeed, half praise, half scandal. But I didn't read them. Let the noise eat itself. Dalton called before sunrise. "They're framing you as the woman who broke Christmas," he said. "People love villains more than martyrs," I answered. He sighed. "Ethan's filed an injunction. Emergency hearing at 10. He's trying to freeze your control of the trust. Then he's still pretending he can win," I said. "Good. I'd hate to see him give up too soon." The courthouse steps were slick with ice. Cameras flashed like lightning questions slicing through the cold. I walked straight past them, flanked by Dalton and Lila, my father's old associate. Inside, the marble hall smelled of polish and tension. Ethan stood near the bench, Margaret at his side, both immaculate, costumed for sympathy. His charm was back in place, but his hands betrayed him, twitching at his cuffs. "Didn't think you'd show up yourself," he said. "I'm not afraid of rooms where truth lives," I replied. He smiled thinly. "Truth doesn't matter here. Optics do. Then you've already lost." When the clerk called our case, the air shifted, anticipation sharpened into knives. The judge, a woman with iron-gray hair and an unimpressed stare, reviewed the file. "Mr. Hayes, you're contesting your father's amendment to the trust." "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan said smoothly. "We believe the document was manipulated. My sister has—" "Your sister," the judge interrupted, "is the certified executor per your father's notarized revision 2 days before his passing." Her gaze flicked toward me. "Anything to add, Ms. Hayes?" I stood. "Only this: my father believed business should serve people, not bury them. He made his choice." Ethan's lawyer objected, "Speculative, Your Honor," but the judge smiled faintly. "Overruled. Sometimes emotion tells more truth than numbers." The rest blurred into noise. Procedural language exhibits posturing. I barely listened. I just waited. Finally, the judge said, "Petition denied. The amendment stands." Her gavel cracked like a gunshot. It was over. Not loud, not cinematic, just done. Outside, the snow had softened into flurries. Reporters crowded the stairs, microphones lifted. "How does it feel to win? Is this revenge?" I paused long enough for one flash to catch my eyes. "It's not revenge," I said. "It's a correction." Then I walked away. That night I drove north, chasing the kind of silence cities never allow. The old mountain cabin waited beneath a skin of frost, its roof sagging under snow. I lit the fireplace and warmth crept slowly into the room, like forgiveness that took its time arriving. From my bag I drew a small wooden box, the one that held my father's silver pen, the instrument of both his last signature and my rebirth. I placed it on the mantel, watching the flame catch its edge. It glimmered like a quiet sword. For a long while I just sat there cross-legged on the rug, listening to the wood crackle. Memories came uninvited, my father's voice teaching me how to read balance sheets, how to listen before speaking, how to measure a man by what he protects when no one's looking. He'd said once, "People invest in belief long before they invest in numbers." Back then, I'd thought it was sentiment. Tonight it sounded like a prophecy. A knock startled me near midnight. When I opened the door, Victor Lang stood in the snow coat, dusted white. "You really do vanish when you want to," he said. "I like silence," I replied. "It doesn't lie." He stepped inside, eyes on the fire. "The world's still spinning around your name. They can't decide if you're a savior or a traitor." "Depends on the profit margin," I said. He smiled. Either way, you've made powerful enemies. Ethan won't stop. I know. Then why so calm? Because storms can't burn what's already turned to ash. He studied me for a long moment. You remind me of your father. He believed in quiet revolutions. Maybe that's all revenge really is, I said. A revolution you don't announce. When he left, the forest had gone still. The world outside was blank and waiting. I stepped onto the porch barefoot in the snow. The cold bit my skin but didn't reach my bones. I knelt, pressed the silver pen into the snow until only the top gleamed beneath the moonlight. Not buried, just resting. Inside, my phone lit up a message from Dalton Ethans calling an emergency shareholders vote. He wants you out. I stared at the screen, then typed back, let him try. Round 2 starts at dawn. Through the window, the first light touched the horizon, thin gold over the white. The war wasn't over, but the fear was. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to define. And I knew exactly what would rise when the snow melted. The next morning broke gray and hollow, the kind of light that exposes everything you'd rather leave in shadow. My phone buzzed before sunrise. 3 missed calls from Dalton, 5 from reporters, and 1 from a number I hadn't seen in years. I didn't answer any of them. I already knew what they'd say. By 8, every headline screamed the same thing: Hayes Capital collapses under investigation. CEO Ethan Hayes steps down. I stood by the window of my apartment watching snow slide off the roof of the building across the street. It fell in chunks, slow, heavy, inevitable. That's what collapse really looked like. Not an explosion, but a quiet surrender. My reflection in the glass looked steady, but inside I felt the tremor of something deeper than victory. I had spent years imagining this day, the day the truth would finally cut through the noise. Yet now that it had come, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt like a funeral. I had set out to right a wrong, to prove a point, but in doing so, I had dismantled the very foundation of my childhood. The ghost of what was the ache of what could have been felt heavier than any victory. The silence of the wind was more profound than the roar of the battle. The phone buzzed again. Dalton. This time I answered. Tell me you're watching the news, he said. I'm watching, I said. Ethan's lawyers are scattering like pigeons. The board's panicking. Investors are jumping ship faster than I can track. You've burned the empire to the ground, Clara. I didn't light the match, I said. I just opened the windows. He exhaled. You know he'll try to blame you for everything, right? Fraud, manipulation, public sabotage. Anything that sticks. He's welcome to try, I said. But he'll find the evidence points only one direction. Toward himself. Toward greed, I corrected. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then Dalton said, You really are your dad's daughter. By noon, the storm had reached the street. Reporters filled the sidewalk outside the Hayes building, their cameras pointed at its glass facade like vultures circling a carcass. I didn't go near it. Instead, I took the elevator to the roof of a nearby parking garage where I could see it from a distance. The tower rose against the skyline, tall, gleaming, and hollow. The Hayes name at the top flickered faintly, half the letters already dark. Down below, employees streamed out through the revolving doors, clutching coats, phones, boxes. Some faces were angry, some relieved. I remembered my own walk of shame years ago, cardboard box in hand. The echo of Ethan's voice saying, You're not built for this. He was right in a way. I wasn't built for greed, but I was built for endurance. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Victor Lang. Meet me. 1 hour, Lang Tower. I typed back fine. His office sat 40 stories up, minimalist and sterile, all white marble and quiet air. He poured 2 glasses of scotch before I even sat down. Congratulations, he said. You've done what most people only dream of, toppled the untoppable. I didn't do it for congratulations, I said. Then why? For truth. He smiled faintly. Truth doesn't pay dividends. It does if you know how to invest it. He leaned back, studying me. You remind me of your father. He thought justice was a form of currency too. But be careful, Clara, currency runs out. I didn't come here for advice, I said. I know, he said. You came because you're tired. Because you've won, but it doesn't feel like it. I looked away. Winning was never the goal. Survival was. He nodded slowly, then slid a folder across the table. Then maybe it's time to build something new. A merger Lang Dynamics and Hayes Trust. Clean slate. Publicly ethical, privately unstoppable. I didn't touch the folder. You want to buy my peace of mind? I want to partner with it, he said. Not yet, I said, standing. Not while the ashes are still warm. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was washed pale blue, but the city still wore its bruises. I walked past a cafe where a TV played the news. Ethan's face filled the screen, unshaven, furious eyes red from sleepless nights. The reporter's voice was smooth, detached. Former CEO Ethan Hayes denies all allegations, calling his sister's actions a betrayal of family and legacy. I didn't stop walking. His words didn't sting anymore. They couldn't. At the next crosswalk, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me said to answer. Clara, Ethan's voice. Hoarse, quieter than I remembered. I didn't respond. He took a shaky breath. You won. Are you happy? Was I supposed to be silence? Then, you ruined me. No, I said. You ruined yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you. He exhaled. You don't understand. It's not just me. They're coming for everyone. Margaret's being questioned. The board's cutting deals. This isn't justice, it's blood. Then maybe that's what it takes to cleanse the rot, I said. His voice cracked. We're still family, Clara. No, I said softly. We were. I hung up. That night I went back to the Hayes estate. The gate stood open, snow piled on the stone pillars. The house was dark except for the glow of the library window. Inside, Margaret sat by the fire, her face pale against the amber light. She didn't look up when I entered. I suppose you've come to finish what you started, she said. I came to end it, I said. She laughed, bitter and soft. You think this is the end? You think justice feels like peace? Wait long enough, it all feels the same. I walked closer. You built your kingdom on deceit, Margaret. It was always going to crumble. She stared into the fire. We did what we had to. Your dad was dying and he trusted too much. I was protecting the family. You were protecting yourself. Is that so wrong? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. When it costs everyone else their soul. She looked up, then her eyes glassy. He loved you, you know. More than anyone. I hated that about you. I know, I said. The fire cracked, throwing sparks across the hearth. She turned back to it, her voice smaller. He said once that the truth was your inheritance. I thought he was being poetic. I didn't realize he meant it literally. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I left the pen, the silver one, on the mantel beside her. Keep it, I said. You'll need a reminder of what honesty looks like. Then I walked out, closing the door behind me. Outside, the air was sharp, cutting through my coat. I looked up at the sky, no stars, just endless gray. Dalton texted again. Stocks rebounding. Board calling emergency session tomorrow. You should be there. I typed back, let them wait. I'm done for tonight. When I reached my car, I paused and looked back at the mansion. The flames inside flickered brighter, reflecting against the snow. The empire was collapsing, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel buried under it. I felt free. Still, freedom came with its own kind of silence, the kind that followed a battle won at too high a cost. I turned the key in the ignition, the headlights sweeping across the empty drive. The house disappeared behind me, swallowed by the dark. And I didn't look back. The storm hit the next day. Not the kind that fell from the sky, but the kind that brewed behind closed doors where men in tailored suits whispered about damage control and survival. There was no need for news vans. The city had already seen enough. The damage was done. The boardroom at Hayes Capital was packed, directors, attorneys, investors. The air smelled of desperation and expensive cologne. I walked in without a word. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to me as if I were both the executioner and the ghost of the man they'd betrayed. Ethan wasn't there. His seat sat empty at the head of the table, his nameplate removed. The symbol of his fall was as sharp as any verdict. Harlan, the oldest director, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for joining us. We understand that following yesterday's events, your authority has been reinstated as interim CEO." "Not interim," I said. "Permanent." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone at the far end scoffed under their breath. I caught it turned and met their eyes. "If you have something to say it aloud." No one did. Dalton stood near the window, arms crossed. His presence was quiet but solid, the way it had always been. He gave a slight nod, as if to remind me that silence could still be power. "Let's get to it," I said. "The numbers are clear. Hayes Capital is bleeding credibility, and half our assets are frozen pending federal review. You all knew this was coming. You just didn't want to believe it." Victor Lang sat opposite me, expression unreadable. "And what do you propose we do now?" "Clean house," I said. "Starting today." The first to fall was the CFO, a slick, nervous man named Bryant, who'd spent years cooking numbers under Ethan's orders. He tried to defend himself, but the documents spoke louder than his excuses. "You signed these transfers," I said, sliding the papers toward him. $3.8 million routed through shell accounts in the Caymans." He swallowed. "I was following directives from whom I asked." He hesitated, eyes darting. "Ethan." The room went silent. I nodded slowly. "Then you'll testify to that." He blinked. "You mean in court?" "Yes," I said. "And if you're smart, you'll cooperate. Because this time, no one's covering for him." Bryant slumped in his chair, defeated. One by one, the rest followed the vice president of operations, the legal counsel, even 2 senior board members who'd sold insider information to rival firms. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I just watched as the walls of deceit crumbled around them. Dalton whispered beside me, "You're dismantling an empire." "No," I said. "I'm purging it." When the meeting ended, the room emptied in silence. Only Victor remained. He stayed seated, his eyes thoughtful, his hands folded neatly on the table. "You're ruthless," he said. "I didn't expect that." "I'm thorough," I replied. He smiled faintly. "There's a fine line. I know exactly where it is." He leaned forward. "You've made enemies. Powerful ones. The kind who don't fight with lawsuits but with whispers." "Are you ready for that? I've been living with whispers my whole life," I said. "I've just learned how to make them work for me." He stood sliding his coat on. "You've got my respect, Clara. But remember, after the reckoning comes the silence. Be careful what fills it." "Thank you," I said. "I'll take that under advisement." When he left, the room felt strangely hollow, like a battlefield after the last cannon fired. That night I walked the city alone. The streets were slick with melting snow, the kind that turned every light into a reflection of itself. Boston looked different now, familiar, but unrecognizable, like an old photograph that had been retouched too many times. I passed a bakery still open, the warm scent of bread spilling onto the street. Through the window, a family laughed over dinner, a mother cutting cake for her children. The sight hit me harder than I expected. For years I'd equated power with control. But standing there outside that glowing window, I realized control was nothing compared to peace. My phone buzzed again. Ethan. I ignored it. Back at my apartment, I found a letter slipped under the door. No envelope, no return address, just my name written in neat slanted handwriting. I sat on the couch and unfolded it. Clara. You think you've won, but you don't understand what you've started. There are people above us, people you can't touch. Walk away before they come for you. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and dropped it into the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, curling the edges of his warning until it turned to ash. For the first time in a long time, I felt no fear. Only clarity. The next morning, Dalton came to my office. "You saw the markets?" he asked. I did. "They're stabilizing. Investors are cautious, but some are calling it a comeback. They're using words like ethical renaissance." I smiled slightly. Catchy. He leaned on the doorframe. "You know you could let someone else take it from here. You've done enough. You could disappear for a while." "Disappear," I repeated. "That's what they wanted me to do years ago. I'm not vanishing again." He nodded. "Then what's next, redemption?" I said. "Not just for me. For the company. For everyone who believed this name could mean something good again." He studied me. "You really think that's possible?" I looked out the window at the skyline at the tower that still bore my family's name. "Everything's possible after the reckoning." That evening, the first public statement went out under my signature. "To our partners, employees, and the public Hayes Capital will no longer operate under the principles that destroyed its foundation. Effective immediately, we are establishing a transparency division to ensure full accountability across all operations. We will rebuild not for power, but for integrity. Clara M. Hayes." Within minutes, messages flooded in. Some supportive, some skeptical, a few venomous. But all of them watched. And that was enough. Later, as I walked along the harbor, the wind stung my cheeks. A yacht passed by, its lights trailing over the dark water. I thought of my father, his voice, his patience. The way he always said, "Storms reveal what's worth keeping." The waves lapped against the pier, steady and soft. I whispered to the night, I kept it, Dad. For once the wind didn't steal my words. It carried them forward. The first snowfall of February came heavy and wet, the kind that buried the city in silence. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, reporters wrapped in coats and ambition. The trial had begun. Ethan Hayes versus the state of Massachusetts, with my name mentioned in nearly every headline beside his. The sister who turned witness. The heiress who burned her bloodline. I arrived early, dressed in black, no jewelry, no makeup. Let them see me as I was plain, calm, unshaken. The courthouse smelled of paper and old wood polish, a place where truth was supposed to live but rarely did. When I stepped inside, cameras flashed. Questions flew like snowflakes. "Clara, did you orchestrate his downfall? Do you regret exposing your brother? Was it worth it?" I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know anymore if it was worth it. But I knew it was necessary. Inside the courtroom, Ethan sat at the defense table. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, suit hanging loose. His arrogance had drained from him like color from old paint. Margaret sat behind him, her eyes glassy and distant. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. Maybe she finally understood what she'd created. The prosecutor's voice filled the room. "We will prove that Ethan Hayes knowingly falsified reports, embezzled corporate funds, and defrauded investors through shell companies designed to hide his theft." Ethan didn't look at me. Not once. But I could feel the weight of his presence like a storm behind me waiting to strike. Dalton sat beside me in the gallery, his hand resting loosely on his knee, eyes fixed forward. "You don't have to be here," he whispered. "I do," I said. "This is where the ghosts go to rest." He nodded, but I could feel his concern. He's not going to take this quietly. He never has. When they called my name, the room shifted. I walked to the witness stand, the heels of my shoes echoing against marble like a countdown. The bailiff swore me in, and the world seemed to narrow to a single heartbeat. The prosecutor asked his first question. "Ms. Hayes, can you describe your role at Hayes Capital before your brother's removal?" "I was the director of strategy," I said. "Until I was forced out." "By whom?" "By my brother." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Ethan's attorney objected, but the judge overruled. The questions came one after another, dates, signatures, transactions. Each one was a cut small but deep, and with each answer I could feel the foundation of Ethan's empire crumble. Finally, the prosecutor asked, "Why now, Ms. Hayes? Why expose your brother after so many years?" I looked across the courtroom at Ethan. For the first time, he met my gaze. His eyes were the same pale blue as our father's, but colder hollow. Because I said softly, "Truth waits until silence becomes unbearable." After my testimony, the defense tore into me like wolves. Ethan's lawyer stood tall, sharp-suited voice dripping with rehearsed disbelief. "You expect this court to believe you, Ms. Hayes? That you, after years of absence, suddenly discovered your brother's wrongdoing?" "I didn't discover it suddenly," I said. "I just stopped pretending I didn't see it." He smirked. "And isn't it true that you benefited financially from the company's success under your brother's leadership?" "Yes," I said. "And that's why I returned every cent." A few people gasped. Ethan's lawyer blinked, thrown off balance. "You returned all of it," I said. "To the employees, he underpaid; to the charities, he cut; to the families, he bankrupted. Every dollar." The lawyer stammered for a moment, then turned away. No further questions. The trial stretched for days, each one colder than the last. Outside, the media spun their stories. Siblings turned enemies. The fall of the Hayes dynasty. Revenge or redemption. Inside, the truth unraveled piece by piece. Victor Lang testified on the fourth day. He walked with calm precision, his suit immaculate, his tone measured. When the prosecutor asked if he believed I'd acted out of revenge, he smiled faintly. "Revenge is short-lived," he said. "What Ms. Hayes did, what she risked, wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration." Ethan laughed from the table. A dry, bitter sound. Restoration, she destroyed everything. Victor turned toward him. "No, Mr. Hayes. She only revealed what you already destroyed." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge didn't interrupt. On the final day, Ethan took the stand. His lawyer's questions were rehearsed, but his answers weren't. He spoke with the same swagger he'd always had, blaming accountants, subordinates, the market, anything but himself. When the prosecutor rose for cross-examination, the tension in the room tightened like wire. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "do you deny signing the falsified reports I signed, what my staff prepared?" he said. "Even after being warned they were inaccurate, I trusted my team." The prosecutor paused, then lifted a document. "Is this your signature?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes." "Then the fraud was yours." He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, I saw something unfamiliar on his face: fear. When the judge delivered the verdict, the snow outside had turned to sleet. "Ethan Hayes is hereby found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will occur in 30 days. Margaret sobbed quietly in the back row. Ethan sat still, staring at the table, hands trembling. I didn't move. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. As the guards led him away, he finally turned to me. "You think this fixes anything?" he said. "You'll always be the girl who destroyed her family." I met his eyes. "Maybe. But at least I can live with what's left of mine." He laughed, once cold bitter, and disappeared behind the courtroom door. Outside, the air was damp and metallic, the snow now gray with traffic. Reporters swarmed again, but this time I didn't stop. Dalton caught up to me at the steps. "It's over," he said. "No," I said, looking out over the city. "It's ending." He frowned. "You don't look relieved." "I'm not," I said, "because truth doesn't end things. It only starts them over." We stood there for a moment in silence. The bells of a nearby church chimed 6 times, echoing through the cold. Dalton glanced at me. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild," I said. "But not from the ruins. From the roots." He smiled faintly. "You sound like your father." "I hope so," I said. "He built something once. Maybe I can too this time, without the rot." I walked down the courthouse steps, snow crunching beneath my boots. The crowd parted, voices fading behind me. Somewhere in the distance, the last of the day's light broke through the clouds, pale and thin but real. And for the first time in years, I felt it on my face, warm, fleeting, alive. The news broke like thunder. Within hours of the verdict, Hayes Capital's stock plummeted. Journalists called it the crumbling of a kingdom. Every major outlet ran side-by-side photos of Ethan being led from the courthouse and me walking away under gray skies. 2 images, 2 legacies, one sinking, one surviving. I didn't leave the city that night. I couldn't. Something about endings makes you want to watch the smoke rise yourself. By dawn, the office tower that once bore my family's name looked like a monument to hubris, steel and glass glowing cold under a pink winter sky. The Hayes sign at the top flickered where one bulb had gone dark, and for some reason that one small failure felt like the truest symbol of what we'd become. Inside the lobby was empty except for the night guard and the echo of my footsteps. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and exhaustion. I walked to the elevators, pressed the button for the top floor, and watched my reflection in the mirrored doors. For the first time, I didn't see my father's daughter or Ethan's shadow. I just saw myself, the woman who had broken and rebuilt herself in equal measure. When the elevator opened, the top floor was dark. Only one desk lamp burned Dalton's. He looked up as I entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Reporters are camped outside. They'll follow you home." "Then let them," I said. "They've already followed me this far." He gestured toward the window. "You can almost see the fallout from here." I stepped beside him. From 40 stories up, Boston looked washed clean quiet, still unaware of the chaos below its surface. "Ethan's lawyers will appeal," Dalton said quietly. "I know. He's blaming you for everything in interviews." "He can have the blame," I said. "I've carried worse." Dalton handed me a folder. "There's something you should see. Internal audit results came in early this morning. Hidden subsidiaries off-book accounts. Ethan wasn't the only one feeding off the carcass." I opened the folder. Page after page of names, signatures, transactions. People I'd trusted. People who smiled to my face while siphoning millions behind it. I closed the folder. "Burn it," I said. He blinked. "What burn it?" "Not literally close it. We'll repay what's owed, fix what's broken. But I'm done hunting ghosts." Dalton studied me for a long moment. "You're really going to forgive them?" "I'm not forgiving," I said. "I'm moving forward." "There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "You sound like someone ready to start over." "Maybe I am." Later that afternoon, the board convened for the first time since the trial. The air in the conference room was thick with unease. Men and women who had once bowed to Ethan now looked at me like I was both savior and executioner. I sat at the head of the table. "We'll restructure Hayes Capital under new principles," I said. "Transparency, ethical accountability, fair pay." A woman at the far end scoffed. "You think words like that will rebuild trust? Investors don't care about ethics. They care about returns. Then they can invest elsewhere," I said. "This company will no longer trade morality for profit." Someone whispered, "Idealist." I turned to him. "No. Survivor." Victor Lang entered midway through the meeting, his presence a quiet gravity that drew every gaze. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. When the board meeting ended, he waited until the room emptied before speaking. "You're rebuilding a house from ashes," he said. "Then I guess I'd better learn to lay brick." He smiled faintly. "There's a faster way. I'm not interested in shortcuts." He handed me a small card, his firm's logo embossed in gold. "Lang Dynamics wants to partner. A clean merger, no hidden agendas. We invest, you lead. We help you make good on what you promised the world." I turned the card over in my hand. "And what do you want in return?" He met my eyes. "To prove that redemption sells as well as greed." That night I drove back to the Hayes estate. Snow had melted into slush, the driveway slick and dark. The mansion loomed against the twilight, stripped of its grandeur. The windows were black, save for one Margaret's. I found her in the parlor, sitting in Father's old armchair, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, her hair streaked silver in the firelight. "You shouldn't have come back," she said without looking up. "Then why leave the light on?" I asked. She didn't answer. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. "They sentenced him," I said quietly. "I know." Her voice cracked. "He called me before they took him away. Said I should tell you he never meant to hurt you." "He didn't have to mean it," I said. "He just had to do it." Margaret's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I suppose you hate me too. I hesitated. No, I said finally. I stopped hating you a long time ago. Hate keeps people like you alive. I won't feed it anymore. She looked up then, truly seeing me. You sound just like him. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, I said. Her hand trembled as she reached for the locket around her neck. Father's the one he used to wear when he traveled. She opened it and stared at the photo inside. He loved you more than this house, more than the company. I know, I said. That's why I had to save what was left of him. Margaret closed the locket and leaned back. You've won, Clara. You've got the company, the respect, the power. But winning doesn't fill the empty rooms. I looked around the parlor, the gilded mirrors, the heavy curtains, the ghosts that never left. No, I said softly, but it lets you lock the doors behind them. When I stepped back outside, the night was quiet. The snow had begun again, soft flakes drifting through the dark. Dalton's message lit up my phone. Partnership with Lang approved. The press wants a statement. I typed back, telling them it's not about rebuilding an empire. It's about rebuilding trust. I stood there for a while, staring at the horizon. The mansion's lights dimmed one by one until only the porch lamp remained a faint glow in the snow. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a grave, peaceful necessary. When I turned to leave, the wind caught my hair, carrying the faint scent of smoke and pine. I didn't look back. Some places aren't meant to be returned to. Some stories aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to end quietly, honestly, like a flame dying in the cold. And from those ashes, I could finally see the faint glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. It had been 3 months since the trial, and the city had finally stopped whispering my name. The tabloids had moved on to fresher scandals, the investors had quieted their fears. And Hayes Capital now, Hayes Renewal Group, had transformed from a cautionary tale into a case study. I thought peace would be silence. Instead, it hummed beneath my skin, restless electric, like the stillness before a storm that never comes. The office smelled of coffee and cold air. My desk was buried in reports and merger drafts, paper monuments to progress. I'd won. I'd rebuilt. And yet I felt nothing but the faint ache of survival. Dalton knocked once before stepping in. You missed the morning call, he said, setting a folder on the table. Victor's waiting on your signature for the partnership. I'll sign it later, I murmured. He studied me. You've been saying that for a week. It's not hesitation, I said. It's exhausting. Same thing, he replied. You fought like hell to get this far. Don't stop now just because peace feels foreign. I met his eyes. Do you ever win something and realize you don't recognize the person who wanted it? He smiled. All the time. That's why I keep losing. The laugh that escaped me was soft, brittle. Maybe losing's underrated. The door opened again. Victor Lang walked in without knocking. He never did. You two still allergic to normal hours? Dalton shrugged. Comes with the trauma. Victor turned to me. And you? Clara allergic to closure. Maybe, I said. It keeps me sharp. He set his coat aside, his tone turning measured. You've done what few could. Rebuilt, redefined, redeemed. The world loves a story like that. You could stop right now, and they'd still write your name in gold. I didn't do this for gold, I said. Then why I looked down at the contract? To remember who I am without needing to prove it. He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed sharp. He understood. That evening, when the office emptied, I stayed. Fog swallowed the skyline, turning the city into a ghost. My reflection in the glass looked older, steadier, yes, but lonelier too. The partnership contract sat on my desk like a promise I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Victor was ethical, strategic, brilliant. But power, no matter how pure, always came with a price. And I was tired of paying. My phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. Ethan's been moved. Minimum security. He asked if you'd visit. I stared at the text for a long time. Then I typed one word when 2 hours later, I was at the prison. Snow dusted the fences like lace. The visiting room smelled of bleach and regret. I waited, my heartbeat steady but distant. When Ethan walked in, I barely knew him. The arrogance was gone, the polish stripped away. He looked like a man who had finally met his own reflection. "Clara," he said quietly. "Ethan." He sat. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, just real. "You look different," he said. "So do you." He smiled weakly. Jailhouse chic. Not quite Armani. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "I heard about the rebrand," he said. "Dad would have liked that." Maybe I said. "But he wouldn't have liked the cost." He nodded, eyes distant. "I think about him a lot. The night before he died, I was supposed to visit. But I thought there'd be time later." "There never is," I said softly. He looked at me, then truly looked. "I was wrong about everything. I thought power made you safe. But it just makes you lonelier when it's gone." I wanted to tell him I understood. Instead I said, "You fell because you climbed alone." He smiled sadly. "And you didn't." I learned not to. For the first time in years, silence between us felt peaceful. Not forgiveness spoken, but forgiveness understood. When the guard called time, Ethan stood. "I'll be out in 3 years. Maybe less." "Think there's room in your world for a brother who's finally learned humility?" I met his gaze. "There might be." He smiled, a small, honest thing. "Then I'll see you soon." The drive home was quiet. Snow drifted across the windshield like forgotten thoughts. Somewhere along the highway, I realized I wasn't gripping the wheel so tightly anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about freeing him. It was about freeing myself. When I returned to the office, Victor was there, leaning against my desk, waiting. "You went," he said. "I did. And he's still my brother," I said simply. "That's all." Victor nodded, eyes soft. "Good. You needed that." I crossed my arms. "You always talk like you know me better than I do." He smiled. "I just listen when you stop pretending not to feel." He reached into his pocket and placed something on my desk. My breath caught. My father's silver pen. I hadn't seen it since the night I left it on Margaret's mantelpiece. "I thought it was gone," I whispered. "Some things don't disappear," he said. "They just wait for the right hands again." I picked it up, feeling the familiar weight. Then I looked at the contract. "Are you sure about this merger, Victor?" He met my eyes. "Only if you are." I signed. The pen moved smoothly, the ink dark and final. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like peace that finally had a name. Victor smiled. "Congratulations, partner." Dalton appeared in the doorway, grinning, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Are we celebrating or pretending to be humble?" Victor laughed. "Celebrating. Humility's overrated tonight." We toasted quietly without spectacle. "To rebuild," Dalton said. "To redemption," Victor added. I raised my glass last. "To tell the truth," I said, "even when it hurts." After they left, I stood by the window again. The city below pulsed with imperfect life. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was watching it from above. I was part of it again, flawed, alive, forgiven. The glass reflected my face beside my father's pen resting on the desk. 2 legacies, one ended, one reborn. Peace didn't roar. It whispered. And as I stood there watching the city breathe, I realized I wasn't haunted anymore by what I'd lost. Because finally I understood what I had kept. Truth. And the strength to live it quietly. It had been exactly 1 year since the night everything fell apart. And in some strange twist of fate, I found myself sitting at another Christmas dinner table. But this time, the air didn't buzz with ridicule or condescension. The house wasn't filled with marble and chandeliers. There were no flashing cameras, no watchful guests, no mother-in-law waiting to humiliate me. Just warmth. Margaret had invited me first, surprisingly. Her message had been short: "For your father. Come home. Home." The words still felt foreign, like trying on a coat that didn't quite fit. But I went. The house looked smaller now, stripped of its arrogance. The portraits of Ethan and father still hung in the hall, but the gold frames were tarnished, the grandeur dulled. Margaret greeted me at the door wearing a simple sweater and pearls that had lost their luster. "Clara," she said quietly, "you look, well." "So do you," I said, though it wasn't true. Her eyes had sunk deeper. Her hands shook slightly, but there was something else too, peace. The kind that only comes after a war you finally stop fighting. In the dining room, the table was set for 4. Margaret, myself, Dalton, and one empty chair, Ethan's. "Do you think he'll come?" Margaret asked. I hesitated. "He said he might." She nodded, folding her napkin. He always hated being late. The first half hour was a delicate dance of avoidance. We talked about the weather, about Margaret's garden, about anything but the elephant in the room. The clinking of silverware on plates was a little too loud, the crackle of the fireplace a little too bright. Dalton, ever the peacemaker, eventually broke the silence with a story about a disastrous company Christmas party. Something about a CFO caught under the mistletoe with an intern. Margaret even laughed, a real laugh, light and unguarded. Then the doorbell rang. She froze her fork halfway to her mouth. I stood up before she could, moving to the foyer. When I opened the door, a gust of cold air rushed in, and behind it, Ethan. He looked different again. Not the slick, smiling man who'd run the empire. Not the broken one who'd sat across from me in prison. Just human. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, and his eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "It's your house, too." He smiled faintly. "It used to be." Margaret appeared behind me, her hand over her heart. "Ethan," she whispered. "You're home." He hugged her gently. "Hey, Mom." It was the first time in years I'd heard him call her that. Dinner resumed, but it felt different now, lighter, like the air after a storm. We talked about ordinary things. Work, music, the way Boston seemed quieter that winter. At one point, Margaret looked at Ethan, her voice trembling. "Your father would be proud of both of you." I met Ethan's eyes across the table. He'd probably tell us to stop making headlines. Ethan laughed. "He'd tell you to take over the world, and tell me to stop pretending I already had." We all laughed then, awkwardly at first, but real. The kind of laughter that shakes loose the dust in your soul. After dessert, Margaret left to make tea, and Dalton went outside to take a call, leaving Ethan and me alone. He leaned back in his chair. "You rebuilt it." "Not alone," I said. "Dalton and Victor helped." "But yeah, it's standing again." He nodded slowly. "You know, in prison, I had a lot of time to think. I was so wrong about everything, Clara. I thought winning was all that mattered. It took losing everything to see that success isn't a destination, it's what you leave behind." I stayed quiet. Some truths didn't need confirmation. He smiled faintly. "You saved our name, Clara. You made it mean something again." I looked at him. That's what Dad wanted. Not the power, not the legacy, just meaning. He nodded. "I get that now." Margaret returned with a tray of tea. Steam rose between us like a fragile truce. "To family," she said softly, raising her cup. "To second chances." We clinked cups gently. The tea was bitter but warm. Ethan cleared his throat. "There's something I wanted to tell you both." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. "What is it?" I asked. "Something I've been planning since I got out. I sold my remaining shares in the company, what little I had left. I used the money to start a foundation. It's called the Hayes Trust for Truth. It funds scholarships for students who study ethics and business." I stared at him. "You did that?" He nodded. "Dad always said the truth is an inheritance. I figured it was about time I passed it on." Margaret covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Oh, Ethan." He looked embarrassed. "Don't make it a thing. I just wanted to do something right for once." I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "You already did." Later, when the dishes were cleared and the candles burned low, we sat in the living room watching the fire. Margaret fell asleep in her chair, her head tilted, her breathing steady. Ethan turned to me. "Remember the first Christmas after Dad died, when you wouldn't come downstairs?" I smiled. "I remember." He laughed softly. "You sat in your room with that broken snow globe he gave you. Wouldn't let anyone touch it. It wasn't broken, I said. It just needed to be shaken. He looked at me, something like pride in his eyes. You were always stronger than me, you know. No, I said. Just quieter. The fire crackled. Snow fell softly against the windows. For the first time in years, there was no bitterness between us, just the weight of shared memory and the comfort of forgiveness. Ethan leaned back, his voice low. You ever think about what comes next all the time, I said. But for once I'm not planning it. I'm just here. He smiled. Yeah, here's not so bad. When the clock struck midnight, I stood and pulled my coat from the rack. I should go, I said. Ethan walked me to the door. You'll come next year if there's pie, I said. He grinned. Always. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the snow glowing under the porch light. For a moment, I looked back through the window at Margaret asleep by the fire, at Ethan watching her with something close to love. For the first time, the house didn't look haunted. It looked alive. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching through the snow. At the end, I paused and glanced at my reflection in the window of my car. I looked at peace. Not powerful, not vengeful, just whole. And as the snow began to fall again, I thought of my father's voice, calm and steady. You don't need to shout, Clara. You don't need to prove anything. Just be. So I was. For the first time in my life, I simply was. Spring came late that year. The snow melted reluctantly, as if the world wasn't ready to let go of its long protective quiet. The city began to thaw in small human ways. Coffee carts opening again, morning trains full of laughter light, returning to faces that had forgotten warmth. I had spent months learning how to live without fighting. It turned out, peace was harder than war. Hayes Renewal Group was thriving. The merger with Lang Dynamics stabilized everything. The media had finally stopped calling me the heiress who burned her brother's empire. Now I was the woman who rebuilt it. Investors called us the ethical empire. The irony was sharp enough to taste. Dalton knocked on my door around noon. You're trending again, he said, dropping a tablet on my desk. The headline read, Clara Hayes, named one of Forbes' most influential women in business. I stared at it for a moment, then laughed softly. Influential. That's what they call you when they can't decide whether to admire you or be afraid. Some people manage both, he said, pouring coffee. I smiled faintly. I'll take the caffeine over the crown. He leaned against the desk, studying me. You've come a long way from the girl who walked out of a courtroom to the woman rebuilding her father's dream. You make it sound cinematic. It is, he said, except for the part where the hero never takes a vacation. Maybe someday. He grinned. Make that someday soon. That afternoon, I met Victor at Lang Dynamics. His office was a cathedral of glass and quiet light. He was already waiting, 2 cups of espresso steaming between us. You're late, he said. I stopped appreciating being influential, I replied. He chuckled. You earned it. What's this about? I asked. He slid a folder toward me. Europe wants in. They're calling our merger the future of conscious capitalism. They want you to represent it. I hesitated. You're sure I'm the right face for that? The world doesn't need another man in a suit talking about ethics, he said softly. It needs someone who's been broken by the lack of it. I looked at him for a long time. You always say exactly what people need to hear. I only say what I mean. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of what had been lost and what had somehow survived. He asked, You ever think about what comes next, not for the company, but for you every day, I said. But the answer keeps changing. Maybe that's how you know you're alive. That night I walked the harbor path alone. The air smelled of salt and thawing stone. For the first time, the water didn't look cold. It looked alive. I checked my phone. A message from Ethan, first student, accepted into the Hayes Trust. Her essay was about forgiveness. Thought you'd like that. I smiled and replied, I do. Keep going. A moment later, he wrote, Dinner next week. Dinner sounds good, I typed back. And something inside me, Something that had been clenched for years finally loosened. 2 weeks later, the charity gala began. The first since the rebrand. Rebuilding with grace. The ballroom shimmered with light and movement, but this time I didn't feel like I was performing. The laughter wasn't armor anymore, it was real. Ms. Hayes, a reporter asked, "What message do you want tonight to send?" I smiled. That it's never too late to tell the truth, and never too early to start again. Victor joined me on stage for the speech. Cameras flashed, hands clapped, but I barely noticed. The applause wasn't for me, it was for the idea that we could change and still be worthy. Afterward, I slipped out onto the balcony. The city stretched below, glimmering like 1,000 tiny chances to begin again. Victor followed a few minutes later. "You disappeared," he said. "I needed quiet," I said. "I used to think silence meant weakness. Now it just feels like peace." He handed me a glass of wine. "You've changed. So have you. Maybe we finally found the right kind of chaos." The light from the ballroom spilled onto the balcony, painting the night gold. I looked out over the skyline, and for the first time I didn't see ambition or revenge. I saw endurance. Victor's voice softened. "You did it, Clara. You made something good out of the wreckage." I shook my head. No, I just stopped pretending the wreckage wasn't beautiful too. The next morning I drove north to the cabin, my father's cabin. The air smelled of pine and earth. The ground where I had buried his pen was green, now dotted with wildflowers. I knelt and brushed away the dirt until the pen caught the light, tarnished but whole. "Still here," I whispered. For a long time I sat there, the pen warm in my hands. I thought of my father, of Ethan, of the woman I used to be, the one who thought revenge could bring peace. It hadn't. But the truth had. Forgiveness had. When I returned to the city that evening, I stopped at the office. The halls were quiet, the night soft. I set the pen on my desk beside a photograph, my father, Ethan, and me, sunlight spilling across our faces. The weight of light, I realized, is heavier than darkness, but worth carrying. I turned off the lights. The skyline glimmered in the window's reflection, alive, imperfect, free. Tomorrow would come with new choices and new versions of me. But tonight, I let the silence hold me. No noise, no battle. Just peace at last, earned at last, understood. Summer arrived gently, like an apology for all the storms that came before. The world had warmed again, streets blooming with color, laughter spilling from cafes, music drifting from open windows. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I wasn't fixing or fighting or proving. I was simply living. I had bought a small townhouse by the harbor. It wasn't grand like the old estate, or sleek like the penthouse offices I'd once occupied. It was quiet, sunlit, with creaking floors and the smell of salt and coffee every morning. There were no maids, no marble, no boardrooms, just me and the soft rhythm of a life that finally fit. Every morning I walked to the end of the pier and sat with a notebook. Not for business plans or strategies, just words. Thoughts. Letters I'd never send. Sometimes to my father. Sometimes to the woman I used to be. That morning the waves shimmered with the kind of calm that comes only after everything has burned. The gulls called above the air, tasted of sea and sunlight, and for a brief moment I thought this must be what peace feels like when it stops pretending to be fleeting. Dalton came by around noon holding 2 cups of coffee and a stack of folders he pretended not to be carrying for work. "You can't stop building things, can you?" I teased. He grinned. "I'm learning from the best." He sat beside me on the porch. "You know, it's strange. I've seen empires rise and fall, but I've never seen someone rebuild one and walk away from it." "I didn't walk away," I said. "I just stopped needing it." He nodded. "How's Ethan? Good. He's keeping the foundation running. He sent me a photo of the first scholarship recipient, a bright kid from Kansas who wants to study ethics and finance." Dalton laughed softly. "Ethics and finance. Now that's revolutionary." "Exactly," I said. "Maybe that's the real legacy." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" "Every day," I said. "And I still can't believe it." That evening, Victor called. His voice was warm but formal, like he wasn't sure whether to talk business or friendship. "I'm in New York," he said. "They're asking for a keynote speaker for the International Ethics Summit next month. They want you." I smiled. "They want the woman who humiliated half of Wall Street at Christmas dinner. They want the woman who turned it into a lesson," he said. "Think about it." "I will." He paused. "You sound happy." "I am," I said. "For once." "I'm glad," he said softly. "You deserve it, Clara." When we hung up, I sat for a while staring out at the harbor lights flickering across the water. It wasn't a victory I felt. It wasn't even a relief. It was gratitude, the kind that hums quietly like a heart rediscovering its rhythm. The following week, I visited the Hayes Foundation's new headquarters. Ethan met me outside, holding a clipboard and wearing a wrinkled shirt that made him look more like a professor than an ex-CEO. "You're late," he said, smiling. "Some things never change," I replied. Inside the office buzzed with life. Young people, bright-eyed, idealistic, filled the space with chatter and energy. The walls were covered with photographs, students' families, community projects. It wasn't opulent, but it was alive. Ethan led me into his small corner office. A framed newspaper headline hung on the wall. "Hayes Foundation launches National Scholarship Program." "You did all this?" I asked. He shrugged. "With help. Turns out doing the right thing gets easier when you stop expecting applause." I looked at him proud, and a little amazed. "Dad would have loved this." He nodded. "I think he does." We walked out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was dipping low, painting the buildings gold. Ethan leaned on the railing. "You know, he said I used to think success was about being remembered. Now I think it's about what you leave behind when people stop saying your name." "That's wisdom," I said. "Who taught you that?" He smiled. "My sister." That night I went back to the cabin in the woods, one last visit before selling it. I built a fire and sat on the porch watching the sparks rise into the dark. The pen was still in my pocket, the one I dug from the earth months ago. It felt lighter now, like it had finished its purpose. I took out my notebook and wrote one last letter. "Dad, you told me the truth was an inheritance. I used to think you meant money or legacy. But I see it now, it's peace. It's knowing who you are when no one's watching. I've made mistakes, but I've made meaning out of them too. You were right. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to be still long enough to listen. If you're watching, I hope you're proud not of what I built, but of what I became. Love, Clara." I tore the page from the notebook, folded it once, and tossed it into the fire. It curled, flared, and disappeared into sparks that drifted up into the night sky. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel the ache of absence. I felt presence. Weeks passed. Life settled into something beautifully ordinary. Coffee with friends, letters from scholarship students, walks by the harbor. And then one morning, I woke up to an envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a handwritten note on thick cream paper to Ms. Hayes. "We are honored to invite you to speak at the International Ethics Summit, to share your journey from legacy to integrity. The world needs your story. The committee." I laughed softly, shaking my head. I didn't need the stage anymore. But maybe someone out there needed to hear that redemption wasn't glamorous, that it was slow, quiet, and deeply human. I picked up my father's pen and signed the reply, "I'll be there." On the night of the summit, the stage lights were soft, the audience hushed. I stood there, hands steady, heart calm. When I was younger, I began, "I thought justice was loud, that you had to break things to fix them. But what I've learned is that real justice isn't about destruction, it's about restoration. It's about the truth that heals instead of punishes." The room was silent. Faces watched me, some familiar, some new. My father once told me that truth is an inheritance. He was right. But it's not something we're born with. It's something we earn through failure, through forgiveness, through courage. And if I can leave you with anything, it's this: redemption isn't revenge. It's the quiet promise that light always finds its way back. The applause came slowly at first, then all at once steady, warm, unforced. When I stepped off the stage, Victor was waiting backstage, his smile small but proud. "You found your ending," he said. I shook my head. "No, just the truth." Later that night, as the plane took me home, I looked out the window. The city lights below shimmered like the stars had finally fallen to earth. I pressed my palm against the glass, the reflection of my father's pen resting in my lap. I had chased revenge once. Now I carried peace. The world outside blurred into gold, and for the first time I understood the story wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I chose to keep. And I chose the truth. Always true. If this story found you, I whispered to the dark, don't forget to share it. Because every broken thing can be rebuilt, and every silence can be rewritten into strength. Then I smiled, whispering softly, share your thoughts below. Sometimes truth begins in a comment. A quiet breath escaped my lips before I added one final thought. Your story might begin where mine ends. And I closed my eyes, letting the quiet promise of a new beginning carry